Namaste. Blessed love and peace in Rastafari. Hethche. This is a 1 hour walkthrough of the Digha Nikâya, the long discourses of the Buddha. Session dos, part dos, volume dos. Again, Polytext Society, Rhys David translation, Max Mueller editation. Actually, there's no accreditation to Max Mueller for this particular volume, but it is Rhys David's. This all together. So here we go. Continuing on. So this includes the Suttas 14 a 23, 14 to 23. The first of these is the Mahapadana Sutta, numero 14. Again, thus have I heard. The Exalted One was staying at Savatthi in Anatta Pindika's pleasaunce in the Jeta wood at the Karari Tree Cottage. Now, amongst many bhikshus who had returned from their alms tour and were assembled, sitting together after their meal in the pavilion in the Karari grounds, a religious conversation bearing on previous births arose to the effect that thus and thus were previous births. So the Buddha arrives and asks if the brethren would like to hear religious discourse, and they say yes. So he says, let's roll. He gives a description of previous Buddhas, and there are 7 that are described here. And this is basically a chart that the translators provide. The Buddhas include the Pasi, Siki, Vesabu, Kakusanda, Konagamana, and Kassapa, and the Gautama, which is actually the Buddha who is the known of today. In each of these, it shares the eon in which the Buddha arrives, the rank or the varna of each one, the family that that Buddha is born into, the length of life, the tree under which that particular Buddha becomes enlightened, the name of the two chief disciples, the number of arhats present at the assemblies, the name of the usual attendant, the far of the individual, the more of the individual, and the birthplace. So that is what is listed in this chart. The Buddha specifically describes Vipassy, and the Buddha provides a narrative of the Vipassy's life. So the Buddha describes the nature concerning the birth of a Tathagata, the birth of a Bodhisattva, concerning the conception, descending into the Moor's womb, the life within the Moor's womb, the birth. There are different characteristics that are attributed to this sequence. The life of the Moor, her behavior, her righteousness, the actual details of the process of the birth, what some of the characteristics in that process are, what happens in the world when a bodhisattva is born. It actually includes there are a number of characteristics that are included within the birth of a bodhisattva. Um, and so then the Buddha provides the further description of the narrative of the far of the Buddha, Bandhuman, the Raja. Um, and so Bandhuman is the king to whom Vipassi is the former Buddha. Bandhuman is the king to whom Vipassi is born. And Bandhuman summons his Brahmin advisors to provide some description about what could be said. Soothsayers is the description utilized here. And so then the advisors observe and see the 32 signs um, of a great man, and says that one of two paths are in front of his son. One is being a righteous king, ruling the further extents of the kingdom in righteousness, and the other path is that of a Buddha, and renouncing the kingdom and becoming a spiritual aspirant and uh, living that life, a Buddha supreme. So, the Buddha, in describing this, describes what the 32 marks are of a Superman. Um, so, upon hearing the predilections, Bandhuman the Raja orders that his son be bestowed with all the treasures, to avoid being, so that he stays in the household life, stays to being king, and avoids becoming a renunciate. Um, he builds 3 palaces, one for the rains, one for winter, and one for the summer, looking at verse 38. Well, I'll just read it. Now Bandhuman Raja, brethren, had 3 palaces built for the boy Vipassi, one for the rains, one for the winter, and one for the summer, and he had them fitted with every kind of gratification for the 5 senses. Thus it came to pass that Vipassi spent the 4 months of the rainy season in the rains palace, ministered to by bands of female musicians, and not once did he come down from the upper terrace into the mansion. So that concludes the first chapter. Second chapter begins. So it begins by saying, now young master Vipassi, brethren, when many years, many centuries, many thousands of years had passed by, bade his charioteer make ready the state carriages, saying, get ready the carriages, benevolent charioteer, and let us go through the park to inspect the pleasaunce. So he's leaving his immediate domains, which is uncommon. And as he's driving through the park, he sees an aged man. Looking at verse 2 in chapter 2. Dos. Now the young master Vipassi saw, brethren, as he was driving to the park, an aged man as bent as a roof gable, decrepit, leaning on a staff, tottering as he walked, afflicted and long past his prime. And seeing him, Vipassi said, that man, benevolent charioteer, what has he done, that his hair is not like that of other men, nor his body? He is what is called an aged man, my master. But why is he called aged? He is called aged, my master, because he has not much longer to live. But then, benevolent charioteer, am I too subject to old age, one who has not got past old age? You, my master, and we too, we are all of a kind to grow old, we have not got past old age. Why then, benevolent charioteer, enough of the park for today, drive me back hence to my rooms. So Vipassi grows up in this lifestyle of all types of pleasure, and experiencing very little pain, affliction, and knowing much about that experience of life. So when he leaves the house, he sees elderliness, he sees agedness, decrepitness, a man bent and walking slowly. And so he's like, what's that? There it is. He says, am I going to experience that? Yeah. So we all are not immune to that. So that is the first experience. So then on seeing that, the Vipassi goes back into the house, back to his home. So then the father asks the charioteer how it goes. The charioteer tells him. So then the father bestows further riches on him so that he is further distracted from that experience. And then again, Vipassi goes out, and the next time he goes out, he sees a sick man and asks his charioteer the same thing. The charioteer says, yeah, we're not beyond getting sick. So then he goes back, and he's again disgusted. His far again bestows him with treasures, and distracts him. And then, but later, then he goes out again. And then when he goes again, he sees a funeral. He says he sees the dead body, and asks, "Yo, death, what is death?" And so the charioteer describes it to him, and he's distraught. and returns back. Then, after a long time again, he goes out and he sees a wanderer, a mendicant, an ascetic, a monastic, whose head is shaved bald and wearing yellow robe. He asks what it is. And verse 14 says, again, chapter 2, is, and he saw, brethren, as he was driving to the park, a shaven-headed man, a wanderer wearing the yellow robe, and seeing him, he asked the charioteer, that man, benevolent charioteer, what has he done? That his head is unlike other men's heads, and his clothes too are unlike those of others. That is what they call a wanderer, because my master, he is one who has gone forth. What is that to have gone forth? To have gone forth, my master, means being thorough in the religious life, thorough in the peaceful life, thorough in benevolent actions, thorough in meritorious conduct, thorough in harmlessness, thorough in kindness to all creatures. So then Vipassi is inspired by this. Excellent indeed, frontier is what they call a wanderer, since so thorough is his conduct in all those respects. Wherefore drive up to that forth-gone man. So he interviews the mendicant, and the mendicant then again states what is just stated. And then at that point, Vipassi decides to become a mendicant, an ascetic, one who has gone forth. So that's what happens. Verse 15, Vipassi cuts his hair off and dons the yellow robes. So then many people follow Vipassi into the homeless state, and continue with him in his walk. But he sees that it's too much of a commotion, so he solicits. He goes off on his own by himself. So then Vipassi goes into the sequence of condition, the maybe called dependent origination, but basically here in verse 18, 18, it's an extending verse. It says, then to Vipassi, the Bodhisattva brethren, this thought occurred. What now being present is decay and dying also present. What conditions decay and dying? Then, brethren, from attention to the cause arose the conviction through reason. Where birth is, there is decay and dying. Birth is the condition of decay and dying. So then from there's a cause and effect. From birth, the conditions of birth, becoming, grasping, craving, feeling, contact, the six-fold field of senses, name and form. So through that cause and effect process, then Vipassi, through this logical process, says, then to Vipassi, the Bodhisattva, still verse 18, then to Vipassi, the Bodhisattva, brethren, this occurred. What now being present is name and form also present. What conditions name and form? Then, brethren, from attention to the cause arose the conviction through reason. Where cognition is, there is name and form. Cognition is the condition of name and form. Then to Vipassi, the Bodhisattva, brethren, this occurred. What now being present is cognition also present. What conditions cognition? Then, brethren, from attention to the cause arose the conviction through reason. Where name and form is, there is cognition. Name and form, conditions, cognition. So there's a little bit of a loophole here, but it's a very highly intellectualized, highly cognized loophole that in and of itself provides a certain amount of isolation from perhaps lower tier cognition, enough to provide some quiet for further insight and revelation. So eventually there's the proclamation in verse 19, coming to be, coming to be. At that thought, brethren, there arose to Vipassi the Bodhisattva a vision did things not called before to mind, and knowledge arose, reason arose, wisdom arose, light arose. And so then he goes through the reverse sequence, discerning when does decay and dying cease, where is it absent. So if in the reverse sequence, when this is absent, then that is absent. And so it goes down into from decay and dying to cognition, name and form. And this is basically the sequence as it described. Verse 21. Then to Vipassi the Bodhisattva brethren this occurred. Lo, I have won to this the way to enlightenment through insight. And it is this, that from name and form ceasing, cognition ceases, and conversely, that from name and form ceasing, the sixfold field ceases. From the sixfold field ceasing, contact ceases. From contact ceasing, feeling ceases. From feeling ceasing, craving ceases. From craving ceasing, grasping ceases. From grasping ceasing, becoming ceases. From becoming ceasing, birth ceases. From birth ceasing, decay and dying, grief, lamentation, ill, sorrow, and despair cease. Such is the cessation of this entire body of ill. Ceasing to be, at that thought, the brethren, there arose of Vipassi the Bodhisattva vision into things that are not called before to mind, and knowledge arose, reason arose, wisdom arose, light arose. And that nears the conclusion of chapter 2 of the 14 Sutta. Then going into chapter 3. Vipassi declares this experience of truth. And decides not to share it. But then Angel arrives to encourage Vipassi to share it. Vipassi thinks, well, people aren't going to get it. Why waste my time? Da 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 da. And Angel arrives and said, there are some whose veil is very thin, who are close enough to be able to reach and appreciate and respect and respond to the Dharma that Vipassi has to share. And so then Vipassi decides to arrive and share the Dharma. The Dhamma. So Vipassi goes to the first person who is a keeper of a park and then provides the Dhamma that he wins. And Vipassi provides it to additional kinfolk as well. And there's the description of 84,000 souls, 84,000 souls, receiving ordination under Vipassi, the Exalted One. Looking at verse 17, 17. So there are so many living there that at Bandumanti that Vipassi gives leave to the Sangha, and communicates to the Sangha to disperse, to continue out and share it as appropriate, and after 6 years to return to Bandumanti and recite the rules, the Vinaya, the rules of the Sangha. So this is the charge that Vipassi gives to his apostles, his disciples. I grant you leave, brethren, fare ye forth on the mission that is for you the benefit of the many, for the happiness of the many, to take compassion on the world, and to work benefit and benevolence and happiness to angels and men. Go not singly, but in pairs. Teach ye, brethren, the Dhamma, lovely in its origin, lovely in its progress, lovely in its consummation, both in the spirit and in the letter. Proclaim ye the higher life in all its fullness and in all its purity. Beings there are whose eyes are hardly dimmed with dust, perishing because they hear not the Dhamma. They will become knowers of the Dhamma. Further, brethren, after every 6 years have passed, come ye to Bandamati, there to recite the Patimoksha. Patimoksha is the term described for the rules of the Sangha. So from there, the Buddha describes the further lineage that the Buddha states at the beginning of the sutta. And that concludes the sutta. Then we get into Sutta 15, which is 15, Maha-Nidana Sutta. Thus have I heard. The first one continues on. Thus have I heard. The Exalted One was once dwelling amongst the Kurus. Now a township of that country is named Kamasadama. And the Venerable Ananda came to where the Exalted One was, bowed in salutation before him, and took a seat on one side. And so seated, he said to the Exalted One, Wonderful Master and marvelous it is that whereas this doctrine of events as arising from causes is so deep and looks so deep, to me it seems as clear can be. The Buddha responds by saying, Say not so, Ananda, say not so. Deep is this doctrine of events as arising from causes, and it looks deep too. It is through not understanding this doctrine, through not penetrating it, that this generation has become a tangled skein, a matted ball of thread like to munja grass and rushes, unable to overpass the doom of the waste, the woeful way, the downfall, the constant round of transmigration. So then the Buddha gives the same, a similar sequence about old age, birth, becoming, grasping, craving, sensation, contact, name and form, cognition. So it's the same sequence as previously described. The cause and effect sequence. And the Buddha gives further repetition and detail concerning that sequence. And there's emphasis about craving being a causal factor of this sequence. And further negative experiences are described as a consequence of the craving as well. And then further detail towards the other components of the sequence. The Buddha then begins to talk about the different perspectives concerning the soul and next life. The Buddha describes different components of cognition, different realms of existence, and then 8 stages of deliverance, looking at verse 35. And that concludes the sutta. It is a somewhat detailed doctrine. It is other than the foundational teachings of the Buddha. So that's one reason I'm saying from going into the details about that. The next one is the Mahaparinibbana Sutta. Now this is one of the major suttas within the entirety of the Digha Nikâya. This is the narrative of the attainment of Nibbana. So this chronicles the Buddha's transcendence from life when he leaves the Sangha and attains the final state of nirvana. So again, it begins with "Thus have I heard," and actually there is a king, Ajatasattu, that sounds familiar, who is determined to destroy a rivaling kingdom, the Vajjayans. So he wants to go to the Buddha to see if the Buddha will like confer or concur or acknowledge or affirm that prospect of conquering the Vajjayans. So what the Buddha says in response is that Ananda is with him, and the Buddha says to him, "Have you heard, Ananda, that the Vajjayans foregather often and frequent the public meetings of their clan?" "Master, so I have heard," replied he. "So long, Ananda," rejoined the Blessed One, "as the Vajjayans foregather thus often and frequent the public meetings of their clan, so long may they be expected not to decline but to prosper. And then the Buddha asks additional questions to Ananda, and this is front of the contingency that is seeking basically confirmation of the ambitions of conquering. But the Buddha is giving advice to the contrary. But instead of doing it directly to the solicitors, the Buddha is describing this to Ananda, and then the Buddha explains to that contingency in verse 5. Then the Exalted One addressed Vasakara, the Brahmin, and said, "When I was once staying, O Brahmin, at Vasali in the Sarandada shrine, I taught the Vajrayans these conditions of well-being, and so long as these conditions shall continue to exist amongst the Vajrayans, so long as the Vajrayans shall be well instructed in those conditions, so long may we expect them not to decline but to prosper. We may expect them So to go back somewhat back to verse 4, these are the conditions that the Buddha teaches. So basically, the Vajrayans had already gone to the Buddha way before this scenario, before this conversation, and the Buddha prescribed a guidance to the Vajrayans about how to maintain the kingdom. So as long as the Vajrayans maintain that formula that the Buddha provides, then the Buddha says that it's expected that the Vajrayans will continue to prosper. So these are the things that the Buddha advises to the Vajrayans. So long, Ananda, as the Vajrayans meet together in concord and rise in concord and carry out their undertakings in concord, so long as they enact nothing not already established, abrogate nothing that has already been enacted, and act in accordance with the ancient institutions of the Vajrayans as established in former days, so long as they honor and esteem and revere and support the Vajrayan elders and hold it a point of duty to hearken to their words, so long as no women or girls belonging to their clans are detained amongst them by force or abduction, so long as they honor and esteem and revere and support the Vajrayan shrines in town or country, and allow not the proper offerings and rites as formerly given and performed to fall into desuetude, so long as the rightful protection, defense, and support shall be fully provided for the Arahats amongst them, so that the Arahats from a distance may enter the realm, and the Arahats therein may live at ease, so long may the Vajrayans be expected not to decline, but to prosper. So those are the conditions that the Buddha describes. And so once the contingency looking for conquest sees this, they recognize the futility of the endeavor. They continue on their way. And then from this, then the Buddha gives an address to the Sangha directly, his own followers. And so basically the Buddha utilizes those same characteristics in the context of the Sangha. The respect for elders, treatment of additional people, meeting regularly, all the 7 ones that were described before, but this in the context specifically of the Sangha. And then the Buddha provides 7 further conditions of like heightened prosperity. That's in chapter verse 7, and then again in verse 8, siete and ocho. Further 7. So it's like building upon building, and then there's a description of 6 practices, and it goes in further detail, but that's the basic gist of it. There's reference to the hindrances. Well, actually, it's the intoxications of sensuality, becoming, delusion, and ignorance. So it's the intoxications rather than specifically the hindrances. So then Sariputta, another one of the prominent followers of the Buddha, arrives and affirms the Buddha's teachings. And the Buddha says that's a rather bold proclamation. You must know everything. And Sariputta says, I don't know everything, but I know the things you've taught me, and I still say this. And so there's some repetition of some of the teachings. The Buddha provides some advice to the householders, looking at verse 23, 23, a fivefold advice, and that continues on through 25. So then there are people who ask the Buddha to have meal with him, and he agrees. And that's essentially how chapter Uno concludes. There are six chapters to this to the sutta. So then chapter Dos begins. Now the Exalted One addressed the Venerable Ananda and said, "Come, Ananda, let us go on to Kotigama." So they're walking together, and the Buddha makes reference to the Aryan truth of sorrow. The Aryan truth, this is verse 2. The Aryan truth about sorrow, the Aryan truth about the cause of sorrow, the Aryan truth about the cessation of sorrow, and the Aryan truth about the path that leads to that cessation. So then the Buddha provides a proclamation about upright conduct, contemplation, and being freedom from the intoxications of sensuality, becoming, delusion, and ignorance. So then there's a question about where the previous followers are, who passed from life. And so the Buddha describes where these people continue on after passing from this temporal life. And the Buddha is somewhat frustrated because of that consideration of it being comparatively menial. But the Buddha provides that response. And so here in verse 10, again, here in chapter Dos, the Buddha provides a beneficial articulation of the relationship between benevolent deeds and a peaceful mind. The Buddha says, "There too at the brick hall at Nandika, the Exalted One held that comprehensive religious talk with the brethren, saying, such and such is upright conduct, such and such is earnest contemplation, such and such is intelligence. Great becomes the fruit, great the advantage of earnest contemplation when it is set round with upright conduct. Great becomes the fruit, great the advantage of intellect when it is set round with earnest contemplation. The mind set round with intelligence is quite free from the intoxications. That is to say, from the intoxication of sensuality, from the intoxication of becoming, from the intoxication of delusion, from the intoxication of ignorance." So again, from benevolent deeds comes contemplation. From contemplation arrives the intelligence, the insight, the wisdom, the answers people are looking for. So the Buddha answers the questions about how to become mindful, how to become self-possessed. We're looking at verse 12, 13. And at this point in verse 14, we have the person of Ambapali, who is a courtesan. And she arrives and asks the Buddha for a meal. And so that he grants it to her by keeping silent. So then she continues on her way back to her place. And as she's doing that, she interacts with the Lakavis who are on the way to ask the Buddha for a meal. And so then Ambapali is a little bit boisterous or a little bit cheeky and drives right up to the Lakavis. And the Lakavis have to like stop and Ambapali boasts that she's already invited the Buddha to have a meal with her. So then the Lakavis call her a mango girl, then go and ask the Buddha to have a meal, and Buddha says, "I already agreed with Ambapali." So then they said they've been outdone by a mango girl. So then the Buddha goes and has a meal with Ambapali and says the same thing, such and such is upright conduct, dot, dot, dot. The rainy season arrives. The Buddha experiences a sickness, but the Buddha cultivates a mindfulness to allay the sickness so that he can complete his task of sharing the Dhamma through the rainy season. So then Ananda asks the Buddha like to keep on living and to help to teach the Dharma and additionally. And so then the Buddha says, "You still expect this of me? I've taught you everything. Why do you still like look for this guidance from me when I've already shared it?" And from that, the Buddha specifically proclaims with verse 26 here in chapter Dos. Therefore, Ananda, be ye lamps unto yourselves, be ye a refuge to yourselves, betake yourselves to no external refuge. Hold fast to the Dharma as a lamp, hold fast as a refuge to the Dharma. Look not for refuge to anyone besides yourselves. And how Ananda is a brother to be a lamp unto himself, a refuge to himself, betaking himself to no external refuge, holding fast to the Dharma as a lamp, holding fast as a refuge to the Dharma, looking not for refuge to anyone besides himself. Herein, O Medicus, a brother continues as to the body, so to look upon the body, that he remains strenuous, self-possessed, and mindful, having overcome both the hankering and the dejection common in the world. In the same way as to feelings, moods, ideas. He continues so to look upon each, that he remains strenuous, self-possessed, and mindful, having overcome both the hankering and the dejection common in the world. So, again, self-sufficiency in spiritual ascension. And that's the conclusion of chapter Dos. Into chapter Tres. Again, the Buddha and Ananda are walking and visiting different places. They're at the Chapada shrine. The Buddha says that he has the ability to continue living, should he choose to do so. But when they were sitting there, or when they were positioned there, Ananda wasn't paying attention, and so the Buddha continues on and says, "Okay." So again, Ananda was distracted, did not respond, did not solicit the Buddha to continue living at that moment when the Buddha stated. So then the Buddha said it 3 times, and still Ananda was not paying attention. And so the Buddha says, "Okay, let's continue on." So they continue on. And so then Mara, the tempter, the evil one, approaches the Buddha and says to the Buddha about references to the Buddha about a previous conversation where the Buddha promised to pass from life once the Sangha reaches a state of prosperity. And so now the Sangha is in that position, and so the tempter, Mara, the evil one, is soliciting the Buddha to pass from life. And because Ananda had not solicited the Buddha to continue living, the Buddha acquiesces, meaning that the proclaiming that, here quoting verse 9, at the end of 3 months from this time the Tathagata will pass away. So it is, the Buddha has stated and has acquiesced from life. And so then the Buddha has another conversation with Ananda, telling Ananda about the powers of the Tathagata and the capability. The Buddha gives a number of doctrines concerning assemblies, abilities of people, of man. Um, and then the Buddha describes to Ananda the conversation that the Buddha has with the tempter, Mara, the evil one, and about the time, setting the time for the Buddha's passing from life. And so when Ananda hears the Buddha say that explicitly directly to him, then Ananda says, "Oh, the Buddha, keep living. We want you to live." And the Buddha says, "It's too late." Um, then again, Ananda says it again, and he says it 3 times. Saying something 3 times is a significant thing in terms of the seriousness of a solicitation and further. And so even after Ananda repeats himself, then the Buddha explains that you had your opportunity. We were traveling before. You didn't say anything. We were here. 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 I gave you hints. You did not pay attention. There it is. So that is the response from the Buddha. And he lists all these different times that he stated that specifically to Ananda, and Ananda wasn't paying attention. So then the Buddha basically finally, and he a little bit chastises Ananda, saying, "You could have had it, but you weren't paying attention." Then in verse 48, the Buddha finally proclaims, "But now, Ananda, have I not formally declared to you that it is in the very nature of all things near and dear unto us that we must divide ourselves from them, leave them, sever ourselves from them? How then, Ananda, can this be possible, whereas anything whatever born, brought into being, and organized contains within itself the inherent necessity of dissolution? How then can this be possible that such a being should not be dissolved?" So this is then the proclamation of impermanence, that everything is temporary, and to be resigned, to be reconciled with this. And so then the Buddha says, "Let's keep walking," and they continue on. And then with verse 50, there is the proclamation of the different doctrines of the Buddha, and those doctrines are as follows. They are these: the 4 earnest meditations, the 4-fold great struggle against evil, the 4 roads to saintship, the 5 virtuous powers, the 5 organs of spiritual sense, the 7 kinds of wisdom, and the Aryan 8-fold path. These, O brethren, are the truths which, when I had perceived, I made known to you, which, when you have mastered it, behooves you to practice, meditate upon, and spread abroad, in order that pure religion may last long, and be perpetuated, in order that it may continue to be for the benefit and the happiness of the great multitudes, out of pity for the world, to the benefit and the gain and the weal of angels and men. And that pretty much concludes the 3rd chapter of the 16th sutta. Now we go to chapter 4, Quattro. So now the Buddha is walking with Ananda and describing this being the last time that the Buddha will see these different places that they're going. They've been making rounds for years, going to different places, and now this is the last time the Buddha will see these different places. The Buddha is providing again the sequence of contemplation, earnest contemplation, upright conduct, and intellect, and the freedom from the intoxications. Buddha provides guidance for him after he passes to his Sangha. The Buddha provides advice to the Sangha for after he passes. How to discern who is speaking an accurate teaching, who is speaking truth, the different methodology, the different sources of authority, and how to have that conversation with respect. Again, being very factual without being accusatory or egotistical. Simply referencing where the teaching is derived, whether it's from an elder, whether it's from a saying, whether it's from directly from the Buddha or otherwise. And continuing to make alms. There is a person whose name is Chunda, who is a worker in metals, who provides a meal and to the Buddha, and this is essentially the last meal of the Buddha. It includes a truffle that only the Buddha can consume. After consuming it, the Buddha tells Chunda to bury the rest of it because nobody else can handle it. And this is what is attributed as causing the eventual passing of the Buddha. The Buddha asks for some water. There were carts that just went by. We're looking at verse 22, and that the waters are muddy. But when the Buddha arrives, then the waters are clear. Going to verse 23, actually all the way through 25. There's the description of the Buddha meditating beyond the occasion of a loud caravan passing by, and the Buddha compares it to a previous time when he was meditating and with lightning flashing right near him. The Buddha is provided with a brand new gold robe, and when he puts it on, it looks dull compared to his countenance that is shining. And in concluding this chapter 4, Quattro, the Buddha says that some people might fault Chunda for giving him these truffles and fault him and say that it's a curse against him, but that Chunda should recognize this actually as a blessing, that he is honored for providing the Tathagata with his final meal. So he wants to allay the concerns or the fears that may occur to Chunda, who provides him with the final meal. And that concludes chapter 4. Into chapter 5. Now the Buddha rests by some twin sala trees, and again things become in bloom out of season. One of the miracles around him, and people are amazed. The Buddha is comparatively indifferent because, again, that superficiality. The Buddha solicits one of his attendees to sit up aside because angels are trying to see him. And so, again, there's this preparation for this event of the attainment of nirvana from the Buddha. The Buddha proclaims 4 distinct places that are places for visiting as pilgrimage. And the Buddha here in verse 8, chapter 5, the Buddha says, the place Ananda at which the believing man can say, here the Tathagata was born, is a spot to be visited with feelings of reverence. The place Ananda at which the believing man can say, here the Tathagata attained to the supreme and perfect insight, is a spot to be visited with feelings of reverence. The place Ananda at which the believing man can say, here was this kingdom of righteousness set on foot by the Tathagata, is a spot to be visited with feelings of reverence. The place Ananda at which the believing man can say, here the Tathagata passed finally away in that utter passing away, which leaves nothing whatever To remain behind is a spot to be visited with feelings of reverence. These are the 4 places, Ananda, which the believing clansman should visit with feelings of reverence. Now, there's an interesting proclamation that the Buddha provides concerning the relationship between man and woman. How are we to conduct ourselves? Ananda asks this to the Buddha. How are we to conduct ourselves, Master, with regard to womankind? As not seeing them, Ananda. But if we should see them, what are we to do? No talking, Ananda. But if they should speak to us, Master, what are we to do? Keep wide awake, Ananda. Now, that being said, the Buddha actually does talk to women, and the Buddha does not prohibit or vilify marriage, just as a side note. Then Ananda provides or asks about what to do with the remains of the Tathagata, and then the Buddha provides a description of how to do that, how the remnants of his remains being utilized as as artifacts of commemoration, places of pilgrimage. And then it's getting quieter, it's getting closer to the time. Then Ananda goes by himself and he starts to cry because he's so sad. And the Buddha responds by saying, "Enough, Ananda, do not let yourself be troubled, do not weep. Have I not already on former occasions told you that it is in the very nature of all things most near and dear to us that we must divide ourselves from them, leave them, sever ourselves from them?" Continue to say what he says before. For a long time, Ananda, you have been very near to me by thoughts of love, kind, and benevolence that never varies and is beyond all measure. You have done well. Ananda, be in earnest in effort, and you too shall soon be free from the intoxications of sensuality and individuality and delusion and ignorance. That's verse 14, 14. Then the Exalted One provides further attributes, proclaims further attributes of Ananda to the Sangha. Ananda is a comparatively sensitive man. So the Buddha provides further reassurance in public on behalf of Ananda for the sincerity and genuineness of Ananda. So then, as things are getting to this point, Ananda solicits the Buddha to continue on to another town because where they are is a comparatively small place. So Ananda says that the Buddha should attain nirvana in a prestigious place. And so then the Buddha describes how the exact place where they are located is actually the site of a huge city where there was tremendous wealth, and was a very prestigious city. Then the Buddha tells Ananda to go into the nearby town and tell the leaders of the town that the Buddha is attaining his enlightenment, his nirvana that day, and that they should go visit him whilst they have the opportunity. So then, again, just like Ananda does, people begin to be sorrowful, but then they heed the words and go and visit. They go visit the Buddha. When they go visit him, there are so many that Ananda skillfully solicits each person to go in groups so that each one can see the Buddha whilst there's still time. And then one other person, after everybody else sees the Buddha, one other person arrives who is a wanderer, Subhadda, and he hears of the Buddha's imminent experience of nirvana, and he goes to see the Buddha. And by this point, it's late. It's near the everything has been done, and so initially Ananda says it's too late. But then the Buddha says, allow Subhadda to arrive. What he will ask will be beneficial, and we'll have a beneficial conversation. So Subhadda asks him his question, and the Buddha responds, and then Subhadda again then agrees to join the Sangha of the Buddha. And that concludes chapter 5, and then we get into the final chapter 6 of the Mahaparinibbana Sutta. This is actually most likely the longest sutta with 6 chapters. So um, in beginning this, the Exalted One says, now the Exalted One addressed the Venerable Ananda and said, it may be, Ananda, that in some of you the thought may arise, the word of the Master is ended, we have no teacher further. But it is not thus, Ananda, that you should regard it. The Dharma, the rules of the order, the rules of the Sangha, which I have set forth and laid down for you all, let them, after I am gone, be the teacher to you. Then the Buddha provides additional instructions. The Buddha invites anyone in the Sangha to ask any question. At that moment, everyone is silent, and Ananda says, isn't that fantastic? And the Buddha says, I know. Basically saying that the Buddha is aware that there's an absence of any doubt concerning the teachings that the Buddha already provides. So then from that, the Buddha proceeds, well, he gives a final proclamation. Then this is verse 7 in chapter 6. Then the Exalted One addressed the brethren and said, behold now, brethren, I exhort you, saying, decay is inherent in all component things. Work out your salvation with diligence. This was the last word of the Tathagata. So then from there, there's a description of the Buddha going through the 4 stages of the 4 jhanas, and then through the further states of mindfulness, back down through the stages of the jhanas, the 4 jhanas, and then going back up, and then finally attaining nirvana or nibbana. Then once that happens, different people make proclamations concerning the Buddha. Each one declaring basically some prose concerning the life of the Buddha. And then there's further emphasis about the impermanent of the permanent of phenomena, component things. So then Ananda goes into the nearby city again and announces the passing of the nibbana of the Buddha, and that there's the necessity of making preparations for his funeral. And so then the people from the town come and arrive. There is a period of lamentation, and then amidst that, then there's the endeavor to carry the body of the Buddha, but then there is a hindrance because there are still angels that have yet to visit, and other kinfolk that have yet to visit the body of the Buddha before it is set afire, before it is burned. So 19, Mahakassapa is one of the people who has yet to visit. So then at verse 23, the body of the Exalted One burned itself away. And eventually the very few remnants that remain from the fire are divided as relics. A number of different leaders, many of whom had the previous discourses with the Buddha, arrive and solicit a portion of the relics to establish a memorial house for the Buddha. And so the remains of the Buddha are divided, and eventually they are divided, and there are memorial houses that are established, places of pilgrimage, and that concludes the Mahaparinibbana Sutta. And then we go on to the Mahasudassana Sutta, numero 17. Oh, yes, 17. That's have I heard. And again, now here's the exalted one again. So the suttas are not necessarily in chronological order. Um, and there's certain intentionality and benefit with that, because after the intensity that is experienced here, now we see the Buddha again. So there's a certain amount of reassurance. And actually, it's a preceding sutta of the conversation between Ananda and the Buddha. And again, Ananda says to the Buddha, "Let not the Buddha," this is verse 2, "let not the exalted one die in this little wattle and daub town, in this town, in the midst of the jungle, in this branch township." And then Ananda says that there are other options. So then the Buddha describes the city of Kusavati. This is a further detailed description from the preceding sutta, and there's the description of all these luxurious elements of a king, and all these different silver and gold and beryl and crystal and coral and all these different trees and castle or palace. And then there's the great King of Glory in this palace, and there's an important doctrine that the great King of Glory proclaims to the others, which is shared in verse 9, which is again the Panchasilas. You shall say no living thing. You shall not take that which has not been given. You shall not act wrongly touching the bodily desires. You shall speak no lie. You shall drink no maddening drink. Ye shall eat as ye have eaten. And this is something that the King of Glory proclaims to the rival kings in the neighboring regions, and so the rivaling kings accept the leadership of the great king, and so this is actually there's somewhat of a mystic narrative here. So this great King of Glory, when going on the Upasada day onto the terrace, sees the Great Wheel, and there's a legend, or there's a guidance concerning the Great Wheel, that a great king who sees this goes out and conquers with righteousness the neighboring kingdoms, and so that's what the king does to the east, to the south, to the north, to the west. So he goes to each of the four corners and proclaims that doctrine. The people accept it, and that is how his kingdom is established. Now, the king is provided with the different treasures, the 7 treasures. And those 7 treasures are explained in detail. Let's see if we have the sequence here. So it's difficult to see the 7 treasures listed succinctly here because they're all listed in detail. There are other articulations when the 7 treasures are described in just one brief sentence. I'll see if I can do this. We have the elephant treasure, the horse treasure, the gem treasure, the woman treasure, the treasurer, there's something else, but I'm gonna leave it for the moment because it's articulated later in a succinct manner. So all these gifts are bestowed onto this great King of Glory, um, and the King of Glory constructs these huge buildings and grounds with these very lavish things that actually are described as blinding the eyes, um, um, with the shininess. And there's and even so, angels construct a palace for the great King of Glory called the Palace of Righteousness. And then in the Palace of Righteousness, there are also these lavish furnishings. So in the Palace of Righteousness, the King of Glory settles and meditates. Um, that concludes the first chapter, and in the second chapter is the description of where the king begins to meditate. It says in verse 2, now the great King of Glory Ananda ascended up into the chamber of the great complex, and there he broke out in a cry of intense emotion. Stay here, O thoughts of lust. Stay here, O thoughts of ill will. Stay here, O thoughts of hatred. Those are the three gems, basically. Or the three harms, and then the absence of the three harms being the three gems. Thus distant only, O thoughts of lust. Thus distant only, O thoughts of ill will. Thus distant only, O thoughts of hatred. And so when the great king arrives into that great complex, then experiences the first jhana, the second jhana, the third jhana, and the fourth jhana. So when the king experiences that, and then also as similar in the Tavijja Sutta, one quarter with thoughts of pity, second quarter, third quarter, and fourth quarter. So the king experiences this heightened insight. And there's a repetition of all the treasures, all the possessions, all the attributes of the king, of the kingdom, and further. And amidst this, there is the description of the Queen of Glory. So the Queen of Glory exists or lives amidst the basic harem, or the house of all the consorts of the great king. So she is the head, but she begins to miss the King of Glory. So she goes to visit him with all the other consorts, and they go to visit him. And when they go to visit him, the king says, "Don't come here," because he's at peace. He wants not to be riled up. And so the queen beckons him to be part of life, and to like arouse his desires for being alive, and starts to talk about all these riches that he has. And then after she lists all those riches, he responds by saying, thus long hast thou addressed me, this is verse 11, long hast thou addressed me, O queen, in pleasant words, much to be desired and sweet, yet now is in this last time you speak in words unpleasant, disagreeable, and not to be desired. How then, O king, shall I address thee? Thus, O queen, should thou address me. The nature of all things near and dear to us, O king, is such that we must leave them, divide ourselves from them, separate ourselves from them. Pass not away, O king, with longing in thy heart. Sad is the death of him who longs, unworthy is the death of him who longs. Thine, O king, and then he starts to list the different treasures that he has, and that he wants to let go of his attachments to these. So the queen begins to cry, and then she does proclaim, as is solicited, for his release of those attachments. And then the Buddha confides into Ananda that he is that king who experiences all these treasures, and that is the conclusion of the Mahasadhusana Sutta. Then we get into the Jhana Vasabha Sutta, which is numero 18. Again, the three bonds are referenced in verse 1, lust, ill will, and delusion. And this is the question about rebirths of the followers of the Dharma. So Ananda solicits the Buddha to describe where some of these adherents from other places are who pass from life that the Buddha has yet to describe. So then the Buddha agrees to find out. The Buddha meditates, and so the Buddha shares to Ananda his experience of that meditation and the answers that he receives to answer those questions. He receives an angel visits him and tells him about the destinations of the other brethren who passed before him. So there's further insight about the nature of the different worlds, the different realms that exist, and how each of the distinctions between these realms, how these realms are attained, what exists beyond these realms, and further, and eventually, there's the repeated proclamation, particularly within verse 27, wide open are the portals to nirvana, or nibbana, as it is articulated in the Pali language. And so this is an affirmation of the Dhamma that the Buddha proclaims. And that essentially is the conclusion of the Janavasabha Sutta, continuing on to the 19th Sutta, 19, the Mahagovinda Sutta. So this begins. I'll just recite the beginning of verse 1. The Exalted One was once staying at Rajagaha on Vulture Peak Hill. Now, when the night was distantly spent, 5 crests of the Gandhara fairies, beautiful to see, irradiating the whole of Vulture Peak, came into the presence of the Exalted One and saluted him and stood on one side. So we have this interaction between a celestial and angel talking with the Buddha. And the doctrine or the discussion is about the 3 and 30 angels, a specific type of angels within the heavenly realm. And there's an affirmation of the doctrine of the Buddha for attaining these higher realms within heaven. So there's further proclamation about the congruence of the teachings of the Buddha in word and act. Again, there's further revealing of the nature of the experience of the celestial realm within the teachings of the Buddha, and the relationship and interaction. The Buddha provides another story. This is a story about a Brahmin advisor who decides. There's a sequence where there's the preparation for the inheritance of a kingdom to go on to the son, and the mechanics of that requiring similar guidance. So there's a young Brahmin who inherits that role of advisor, and then when there's the time for the coinciding son to become the king, the young Brahmin advisor provides guidance. There's the court that makes these arrangements as well. There's agreed upon methodologies of sharing the kingdom and the wealth, and additionally, and so these proceed in the advised manner. So it continues in an upright way, and the details of that are explained in this narrative. Eventually, that pretty much concludes the first chapter of this sutta. So then in the second chapter of the sutta, the Brahmin advisor, because everything goes so orderly and everything is shared, everything is prospering well, there's so much celebration about this Brahmin advisor beyond what he's actually capable of doing. People are making proclamations that are beyond his knowledge. So he says that he has to go out and meditate and like find that knowledge, because he wants to live up to those expectations. When he goes out, he receives guidance about letting go of his position and pursuing the life of a spiritual ascetic. Um, so he continues in that respect. When he returns, he advises his king. He advises the court accordingly, prepares everything accordingly, and basically within the time frame of, it's 1 month, actually 7 days, he prepares to leave and go into the home estate. So everybody makes arrangements accordingly. And that's what he does. He leaves. We're looking at verse 58 at that point. And again, there's the description of him experiencing that ascension of happiness and the insight and the experience of the four quarters, pervading the four quarters with thoughts of love. And in that process, the others actually leave the household state as well, because they're inspired by his leadership. So that's essentially the conclusion. The Buddha describes that experience of the previous life being him, and that there's further ascension that he has yet to attain. So that's pretty much the conclusion of the Mahagovinda Sutta, and we continue on to the Mahasamaya Sutta, which is numero 20. It begins thus: Have I heard the Blessed One was once dwelling amongst the Sakyas at Kapilavatthu. This is his hometown. The hometown of his kinfolk, in the great wood, together with a great band of the Sangha, about 500 of them, all being arahants. And angels from the 10,000 world systems oft times assemble there, that they might visit the exalted one, and the band of the brethren. So then there's the converse between the angels and the Buddha. Further affirmation of the Buddha. There is a basically poetry, prose, that is communicated in honor of the Buddha, and that's pretty much the gist of the sutta and the conclusion. The Saka Panya Sutta, which is numero 21. Thus have I heard, the Exalted One was once staying in Magadha, to the east of Rajagaha, at a Brahmin village named Ambasanda. There he resided on the Vidya mountain, to the north of the village, in the cave called the Cave of Indra Saltree. Now at that time a longing came over Saka, the king of the angels, to visit the Exalted One. So now we have another conversation between the angels and the Buddha. And in this actual occasion, Saka actually solicits another being to play some music to soften the concentration of the Buddha, in order so that the angel may be able to better approach the Buddha. So that's what the person does, and the being actually plays to the Buddha a love song, but it's a love song that the being writes for a woman who he has difficulty winning over, particularly because she is a princess. So this being recites this song, this love song to the woman, um, and references the teachings of the Buddha as a way of describing the beauty of the woman. Um, and, and the Buddha listens to the song and compliments the being for the balance of the song, the harmony and the lyrics. And so from that, then the angel sees that the Buddha is softened, so that the angel can approach the Buddha, and then that's when the angel arrives and begins the discourse. And um, the angel has a discussion about a woman who attains enlightenment and continues on in a state that is higher than some of her male contemporaries. And there's a prose that's described concerning that, and that concludes chapter 1 of the sutta. Um, Saka, ruler of the angels, arrives. Actually, that question. So, then Saka continues on to ask the Buddha a question. This begins chapter 2. Um, Basically, it's a very basic question. He asks, by what fetters, sir, are they bound? Angels, men, asuras, nagas, gandhabas, and whatever other great classes of beings there be, in that they wishing thus, would that without hatred, injury, enmity, or malignity, we might live in amity, do nevertheless live in enmity, hating, injuring, hostile, malign. Such was the fashion of Saka's first question to the Exalted One. To him the Exalted One, so asked, made answer. By the fetters of envy and selfishness, ruler of angels, are they bound, angels, men, asuras, nagas, gandhabas, and whatever other great classes of beings there be, and that they wishing thus, would that without hatred, injury, enmity, or malignity, we might live in amity, do nevertheless live in enmity, hating, injuring, hostile, malign. So Saka appreciates that answer and continues to ask further questions. Then asks where the source of this selfishness and envy are, and then the Buddha provides the causal and effect sequence. Desire, mental preoccupation, obsession, and further on. So the Buddha declares the practice of equanimity, things that should be followed and things that should be avoided. And the distinction of these two things being done through experience, observing the cause and effect of things that are done, the cause and effect that of things that are avoided, and making a decision accordingly. That conclusion is also enhanced through calmness as well, to be able to discern what the actual favorable and non-favorable conditions are. And so the Buddha provides further detail concerning this discipline, and Saka continues to ask further questions. It goes on to describe different types of discipline, different practices from different teachers, and the efficacy or the lack thereof of each. Um, And Saka then describes his appreciation and celebration of the teachings that the Buddha provides, and provides some prose, some poetry in that respect. Uh, and further, um, Saka, which is described as the ruler of the angels, um, tells the being that provides the song that initiates the conversation, that he will be granted the wife that he looks for accordingly. So that is the conclusion of the Saka Panya Sutta 21, and then begins the Mahasatipatthana Sutta, which is numero 22. Thus have I heard, the Exalted One was once staying amongst the Kurus. Kamasadama is a city of the Kuru country. There the Exalted One addressed the brethren, saying, Bhikshus, Reverend Sir, responded the brethren, and the Exalted One said, the one and only path, Bhikshus, leading to the purification of beings, to passing much beyond grief and lamentation, to the dying out of ill and misery, to the attainment of right method, to the realization of nirvana, is that of the fourfold setting up of mindfulness. And the Buddha then goes on to describe which are the four. Herein, O bhikshus, that a brother, as to the body, continues so to look upon the body that he remains ardent, self-possessed, and mindful, having overcome both the hankering and the dejection common in the world. And in the same way as to feelings, thoughts, and ideas, let him so look upon each that he remains ardent, self-possessed, and mindful, having overcome both the hankering and the dejection common in the world. And then on verse 2, he says, and how bhikshus does a brother so continue to consider the body? Herein, O bhikshus, let a brother going into the forest or to the roots of a tree or to an empty chamber sit down cross-legged, crossing the body erect, and set his mindfulness alert. Mindful, let him inhale. Mindful, let him exhale. Whether he inhale a long breath, let him be conscious thereof. Or whether he exhale a long breath, let him be conscious thereof. Whether he inhale a short breath or exhale a short breath, let him be conscious thereof. Let him practice with the thought, conscious of my whole body will I inhale. Let him practice with the thought, conscious of my whole body will I exhale. Let him practice with the thought, I will inhale, tranquilizing my bodily organism. Let him practice with the thought, I will exhale, tranquilizing my bodily organism. So, essential teachings about prana, meditation, and breathing, meditative breathing meditation. So that is again a foundational teaching within the Buddha's doctrine, and that same mindfulness is applied to other actions, including walking, and other basic actions throughout the day. That mindfulness includes a self-awareness about the different components within the individual's body, the different organs, and looking at it very objectively, like looking at a bag of rice and beans, and being able to make the same kind of distinction and understanding the nature of each. Recognizing the relationship with earth, water, fire, air, amidst these conditions. Then it gets rather detailed in terms of the anatomy of the body and the mindfulness therein, particularly in the context of a corpse, and that corpse being in a eternal field. So that is the type of objectivity that is described from the Buddha. And then from that, having a mindfulness about thought, what the nature of the practitioner's thought is concerning lust and the other types of hindrances. hatred, dullness, and further. Um, Then from this, the Buddha back into verse 17, reverts back or refers back to the Fourfold Noble Path. Here, O bhikshus, a brother at the thought this is ill is aware of it as it truly is. At the thought this is the coming to be of ill is aware of it as it truly is. At the thought this is the cessation of ill is aware of it as it truly is. At the thought this is the way leading to the cessation of ill is aware of it as it truly is. And there's further detailed description concerning birth, dying, lamenting, mental illness, despair, all these experiences of suffering. And then actually this is where it gets into the details about the noble fourfold path. So each of those components is discussed in rather significant detail from verse 19 through 21. And each component of the Eightfold Path is listed in further detail as well. And that's the conclusion of the Mahasatipatthana Sutta, numero 22. And then we get into the 13th, the Payasi Sutta, numero 13. Thus have I heard the Venerable Kumara Kassapa was once walking on a tour in Kosala together with a great company of the bhikshus to the number of about 500. And coming to the Kosalese city named Satavya, he there abode. And there the Venerable Kumara Kassapa dwelt to the north of Satavya in the Simsapa tree grove. Now at that time the chieftain Payasi was residing at Satavya, a spot teeming with life, with much grassland and woodland, with water and grain on a royal domain granted him by King Pesanadi of Kosala as a royal gift, with power over it as if he were the king. So again, this is after the Buddha This is actually a rather beneficial sutta, and it describes it's a conversation between one of the followers of the Buddha and another challenger, and the challenger is Kassapa. Well, no, excuse me. The challenger is Payasi, because that's the nature of the suttas. And Payasi is has an ill-contrived belief and is very stubborn. He has hierarchy, he has standing, he has recognition, but he's holding this painful view, and so he's going to Kassapa and challenging Kassapa, holding that ill view. There's no benefit of deeds well done or ill done. And so Kassapa tries to reason with Payasi to provide some examples that's just ridiculous. Look at these things. And so these are some of the examples that Kassapa provides. First, Kassapa asks Payasi if he has any proof of this. And so Payasi says, well, I had these friends who did all these bad things. And I said to them, when you pass away, or when these friends pass away, to let him know about what the experience is after life. And so because he hasn't heard from them, then that's evidence that there must not be anything. And so Kassapa says, come on, that makes no sense. That's illogical, because I have to see the example that Kassapa describes. Well, one of the descriptions that Kassapa provides in response is that when somebody goes and is locked in a jail, are they going to be able to come out? So that's one consideration regarding the absence of the message. Just because you haven't Payasi has yet to receive a message doesn't mean that it's not happening. And then so then Payasi says, well, I have friends who do benevolent things, and I ask them the same thing when they go to let me know accordingly. And I haven't heard back from them, so it must not happen. Then again, Kasapa's like, still, that makes very little sense, because if you look at it in another way, a person going on who's been dirty and filthy and everything else like that, and then all of a sudden, which is a description of this life, then is clean, takes a bath, and is fresh and everything. Are they going to want to become dirty and everything else like that in order to communicate this to Payasi? So then Payasi goes into further explanations about all these tortures that he put on people, and not being people who are criminals, who are found guilty of stealing or doing other things, and then annihilating their bodies, locking them up in glass to see what would happen with their soul, burning them, and disarticulating everything about the persons. And in each of these experiences, there was no evidence of a soul being seen from these experiences. And so it gets rather graphic and rather evident, or rather it gets rather graphic. And again, Kasapa is explaining to Payasi just the lack of logic in the conclusions, in the methodology, and the conclusions that are drawn from them. So still, Payasi is still holding it and won't let it go. And even though Kasapa's responses become increasingly convincing, still Payasi says that even though what Kasapa says makes sense, because Payasi has already made these proclamations, he's not going to let it go, because he has a reputation. He doesn't want his reputation to be smirched. One of the responses that looking at one of the responses that Kasapa provides to these ridiculous trials and experiments is somebody who is a trumpeter and arrives at a town and is playing this music on the trumpet, fantastic, but people had never seen a trumpet before. And so when the person puts it down, they do all these different things to try to make the trumpet speak, and it doesn't speak. And so they say, oh, this trumpet must not work. And even some of the examples that Kasapa gives provide a little bit of challenging. He provides a description again of having a fire drill, a teacher giving his son a fire drill in order to and leaves to make fire, and leaves for a while, and the boy tries to make a fire by burning it and chopping it up, and well, not burning it, but by chopping it up, and doesn't make a fire, and so he says it must not work. So again, it's just very nonsensical. Now, from this, the metaphors get further substance and like further accessible. There's one parable that Kasapa provides about a yaka fiend, whereby two caravan leaders are having this large caravan. It's too big for both of them to go together, so they split it up. One goes on ahead, and another waits a while for weeks for the grass and everything to regrow, so that by the time they get there, it will be fresh for them to do it. So when the first caravan leaves, they arrive at some part of the woods, and they see this person whose hair is wet and everything else, who's a yaka fiend. Somebody, it's a being that eats people, but not necessarily always very evident, so it can be hidden. So this yaka just arrives in its cart and says that, oh, there's plenty of water and grain and everything else like that. You should dump all your grass, and so you can travel faster, and you can fill up all you want on the way out. So that's what the caravan leader does. He dumps out all of the grass, all the furrow, so he can move faster, and he goes on. And the caravan, after a few days, finds nothing. It's all dry. They keep on going. It's all dry. It's all dry. It's all dry. And then they perish because they have no provisions. So then the second caravan begins its way, and then they see the same Yaka fiend. And so the Yaka fiend says the same thing. Oh, the Yaka fiend ate all the people and everything else like that of the first caravan. Then the second caravan begins to leave, not knowing what happened to the first caravan. And so as they continue on the path, they see the Yaka fiend as well, who gives the same advice. But the caravan leader says, "We don't know who this is. We don't know what their plans are. So we can't trust that person. We're not going to dump our stuff. Let's continue going." They continue going, and they see what happens to the first caravan, and so they take all the finer things from that caravan and continue on the way. So that's one of the parables that Kassapa provides. That is actually from verse 23. But still, Payasi is unconvinced, and basically starts saying that like, because he's so entrenched already, he can't let it go. So then Kassapa provides another parable. There are a few that are beneficial, but the one I'll highlight is a little bit towards later. It's actually I think it's the convincing one. So yeah, all right. So this is the one that convinces. It begins with verse 29. So two friends are going to a village. They hear that the village is abandoned. There might be some stuff there that might be of value. So they go there. They find, sure enough, they find some hemp, some just a heap of hemp thrown away. And so they're like, "Yo, we can do something with this hemp. Let's carry it up and let's go." So then they go, and then they find, as they continue on, they find some hemp thread, and they're like, "Yo, this is what we would utilize with the hemp. So let's dump the hemp and take this hemp thread." That's what one says, and that's what he does. But the other one says, "Yo, I've carried this hemp. I'm fine with this. I've carried it for so long, so whatever." So they continue walking. One has hemp thread, the other has the original pile of hemp. Then they go and they find brand new hemp cloths, and the friend says, "Yo, this is what we would do with the hemp thread. Let's take these cloths and continue on." And I think the other friend says, "I'm just going to continue on with this original hemp." So they continue on. They keep finding better and better things. Eventually, they start finding piles of silver, piles of gold, and additionally, so by the end of it, the one friend is coming home with a pile of gold, and the other one is coming home with a pile of hemp. So Kassapa is describing this as the teachings, having a teaching and refusing a higher teaching, a further valuable teaching, just because one is entrenched on the first one. And so it's from this that eventually, finally, Payasi says, "Nice, okay." And there's reference to offerings again. And Eightfold Path, and so after receiving that, after Payasi is convinced, he wants to provide an offering. He wants to provide food for people, but when he provides that food, it's like low quality food. It's like things that he wouldn't eat himself. And so one of the people who's eating challenges him on this, and Payasi says, "Well, you do it then." And so that the distinction between giving not the best of what one has, what one would do oneself, and giving of the best of one has is reflected in the consequence in the hereafter. So that is what is described in the conclusion of Payasi, and that is the conclusion of the second volume of the Digha Nikâya. Alhamdulillah, ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Allahu Akbar. Dao ke dao fei cheng dao, min ke min fei cheng min, ja Rastafari. Deus nos dequies in cele santo quito nomen tuum, vahe guru sanam. Baruch ata Elohim, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kasanu b'mitzvotav tzivanu l'sok b'divrei Torah. Amen. Kyrie eleison, sevomastu savjagatehi, sabe sata bhavantu sukhitata, vagabiyam. Aquaba upendo na amani, fakiri na salami, cinta dam per me, le bovame womajeka, ubuntu shubano fakitka. Session, kamosanida, domo arigato, pilama yellow wakataka, tokodoko shingun, God, we thank you for all that you bless us. Ata jam ya yata afanami. Ado, Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Amen. All thanks and praise to the Most High Elohim. Respect and honor to all our ancestors, all our prophets, all our sages, past and present, known and unknown. Respect and honor to His Majesty Haile Selassie I and Her Majesty Waizara Manen. Blessed love in peace in Rastafari. One perfect love. Namaste. Assalamu alaikum. Meadow.